Hello, Happy New Year. It's the 3rd of January 2022. I'm reading out of BLISS, Afterlife, which is a story I started in 2006 and I wrote on and off sporadically when I felt like it. It's a story about a reincarnation. Bliss passed away at the beginning of the book. I finished book 1 in 2016 and I'm writing on book 2, although I haven't written at all in the last year. So I'm reading, I'll continue, chapter 61, Tony and Melanie. Tony was ready. In fact, he had been ready for over an hour, just sitting, listening to his uncle's latest CD. He had tried to read, but it was no use. He couldn't wait to see Melanie, and he was hungry by now too. So when the clock showed 6 o'clock, he got the bottle of red and a last look in the mirror. Blue jeans, blue t-shirt and sandals. He smiled to himself and gave himself a thumbs up. Only a few steps of the landing to her door, and he felt his heart beating when he rang her door. It was opened very quickly, and she opened the door very wide, a lovely smell wafting out of the door. She smelled lovely, but the lasagna in the background spiced it all up. He held the bottle out to her and stepped into her small hall. Lots of photos on the walls. Go straight through, Tony. Lovely to see you. I laid the table and we'll just pop into the kitchen to put the salad in a bowl. It was a small flat, but the living dining room was large and sunny. A counter in the wall which looked into the kitchen. A large bookshelf full with books and CDs. A lovely little dining table laid for two, a candle glowing and soft music, which he was only now aware of. The large window looked out onto the road, which lay quiet and dark already now, and he felt really good, sure and happy to be here and get to know her better. He joined her in the kitchen. She was just taking the lasagna out of the oven. It looked delicious. Would you take the salad bowl? I have already dressed it. Hope that's okay. And I made some garlic bread. He took it all into the other room. She had the lasagna between her oven gloves and followed him. Oh, lovely. I'm hungry now, she exclaimed. So am I. So this is a one-bedroom flat? Yes, but my bedroom has a lovely size. Have a look around. It will take you all of 2 minutes. I dish out. He had a look into her bedroom. Yes, a lovely large room, looking out over the back garden. Very warm and comfy, he thought. Beautiful coloured bedspreads and pictures and photos and lovely frames on all the walls. It's lovely. Did you have to do a lot here, or was it furnished when you rented it? He asked. It was partly furnished, just newly painted, and I love the warm yellow tones. I brought a few things, bookshelf and a settee and a dining room table and chairs are a new purchase, but I feel very much at home here, and I put all my stuff already on the walls, etc. I like to settle in wherever I live. Come, sit, and let's eat. She poured the wine and they chinked glasses. He took a forkful of lasagna and carefully blew on it before putting it into his mouth. Oh my God, it was good. The wine was really nice too, and he felt great sitting here, looking at her lovely face. This is lovely. It really reminds me of the lasagna my grandmother, we called her Omi, used to make. She was German, and I always asked her for it when I visited. She sadly passed away a few years ago. We visited often. My mum and auntie both speak German. My dad is English. Oh, wow. So is my grandmother. In fact, I call her Oma. She still lives in Germany. I was there not long ago. She lives in the far north of Germany. She's one of a kind, my Oma. Melanie laughed. So was my Omi. I spent quite a lot of time with her, and my granddad. They lived in London for many years. We're quite a big mixed family, a good mix of nationalities really, he laughed, and they started to talk about their respective grandmothers, parents, etc. Melanie's mum and dad were killed in a car accident 3 years ago, and she spent her early 20s with her parental grandmother, who still lived in London. They both thought they'd had a lovely childhood. Melanie's early loss of her parents had added greatly to the mature feelings she had towards death and dying. They were talking almost non-stop. He couldn't help feeling completely comfortable in her presence. They liked each other. They liked the same music, and time just flew by. At around 9, Melanie decided she ought to turn in soon. She was doing the early shift in the coffee place, and they carried everything into the kitchen. Tony felt so good, but he knew he needed to get to bed soon too. Too many late nights, and it felt right when he got up to leave. Do come over with me and have a look at my place. It's also really a one-bedroom flat, but I have a little extra space, half a room. Will you? Yes, why not? I'm always curious how people live. She smiled at him, and they crossed the hall and half landing to his place. So close they had lived for the last 4 months, he thought. He opened his door and she walked into the bright hallway, larger than hers, and leading into the kitchen. Lovely size, she thought. Room for a table and 4 chairs. A lovely window looking out into the garden, and spices and things on the shelves. A mixer and a juicer. Her eyes roamed the kitchen and the hall. Come, have a look at my living room. It also faces the garden and is sunny much of the day. He took her arm and walked into a lovely high-ceilinged room with a beautiful large settee and a recliner chair, big television screen and lots of books and pictures on shelves. Her eyes immediately fell to a lovely silver frame with a smiling woman sitting at a garden table, with a glass on the table in front of her and the sun behind her. Wow, she thought, that's her, the woman of my vision this afternoon. Her mind reeled. She was not unused to similar synchronicities happening to her, but this was really poignant. Who's this lovely smiling lady, Tony? Tony didn't have to look to know who she was referring to, even though the shelf had many photos and collages of pictures. That's my Omi, Bliss. We talked about her a lot tonight. He smiled when he saw her curious face, eyebrows up, and the picture in her hands. Well, would you believe me if I told you that I saw her this afternoon? Well, she's been dead for a while, and she would not have looked like she does here, in this frame, in her 50s. He smiled, a little wryly, she thought. Melanie laughed. He knew what she meant. The Walking Dead, she thought. No, I had a vision in my bath. I get them. But that's another subject altogether. But I found myself on a large paddock by a river. This lady was walking towards me, and she embraced me, and it felt lovely. She said she was Bliss, and that I should pass the love on. She felt a little awkward. What does he think of her? She could not deny her excitement. It was so serendipitous that he asked her over, talking all evening about their grandmothers and parents and childhood, and here she was, knowing this lady. Tony looked at her. He completely believed her. Something about the way she talked about it. She knew what she had seen, and he had been thinking about his grandmother a lot the last few weeks. Tonight's lasagna could have been made by her. The whole dinner, the candles and the old-fashioned music they had listened to, had him remembering lovely times when he had the chance to be with her, his grandmother, by himself. His Omi was quite far out herself. He remembered all kinds of things, getting Reiki healing from her, stories, walks and time on the beach, coming home to some lasagna. He smiled. Yes, she was Bliss. That's her name. Wow. I totally believe you. I do sort of know why. My Omi was quite instrumental in my life. I would not be surprised one little bit if she tried to let me know I'm doing fine. And so is she. He laughed. Oh, I'm so glad you said that. Melanie was relieved. She liked Tony a lot, and to think he'd think her batty would have been a shame. Apart from that, he lived in the same house as she did. I was a bit worried, but I'm sure it was here, and she felt a lovely lady. I'm just wondering about the passing on of love. She didn't feel at the time it was meant for her or Tony, or whether it was completely general, but then she could not exactly remember anymore what Bliss had said. Always the way, unless she writes it down straight away, she thought. But she did see her, and it was the lady of the picture. Tony took her in his arms and kissed both her cheeks. She smelled lovely, and he suddenly thought best to say good night now, otherwise I don't know how this would develop. She laughed, and the moment was over. She put the photo back on the shelf. Well, that was a lovely evening. Thank you for the wine, Tony. Thank you for the lovely meal. I shall be the next one cooking, and you come here to eat soon. He looked at her questioningly. Yes, soon, Tony. I get my week's work schedule tomorrow. I have some stuff to do for my arts course, but let's exchange phone numbers and we text. Once they had gone, Melanie gave him a peek. Once they had gone to the door, Melanie gave him a peck on his cheek. She had to stretch. He was quite tall, she thought, and rushed over to process the whole evening. Chapter 62. Silvana and Steve. Steve is on his way. Silvana hugged herself. She felt so happy to see him. He had just rang to say he was leaving his boy's place. He had sounded so excited. The visit was a success. They had had long conversations about their relationships with their respective children. Silvana found it surprising that he had not seen his son for such a long time. A separation of more than a month in which she did not see her daughter seemed too long for her. They were regularly in touch. She generally knew what was going on in Poppy's life, and probably too often she communicated with Poppy whenever it popped into her head. It happened quite often that she felt that she was a bit too informative, but living alone often prompted her to communicate, and generally her daughter was her favorite target. Anyhow, she thought they seemed to have had a nice time. He sounded really happy and had news for her. She decided to run a bath. It will be over an hour before he could even be here, and she liked to make herself feel good and in the mood before he arrived. A bath was just the ticket. Chapter 63. Steve is on his way. Steve had just come off the phone to Silvana. He was already in the car. They had said their goodbyes and he would see them soon again. Once they are back from their trip to Hamburg, he would be ready to pop by again. He was on his way now, glad that he had someone to share the happy news with in an hour or so. Silvana was waiting for him. Well, he didn't know if she was actually waiting. She seemed always busy in her studio, which she had created in the back of her garden, and he knew she would be doing something. She sounded as pleased to see him as he was. Good time for a bit of listening to his music, he thought, and pressed the button, speeding off towards Brighton, away from Faye and Ben. Chapter 64. Silvana and Steve. Silvana was working in her back garden studio by the time Steve rang her. When Steve rang her, she was feeling a wave of happiness. She'd had her bath, and she was really looking forward to seeing him and feeling him. She grinned to herself. But looking around this lovely space with her dog fast asleep in front of the wood-burning stove and her cat curled up on the settee, she was happy doing what she did, which was listening to blissful music, working on a little picture she had started a few days ago. She had come across a whole bunch of swan feathers on her walk the other day, and she had just arranged a couple of them on her little piece of canvas. She had painted it several times, and the silver background was glinting in the light. She was pleased with it and was rummaging around to find a few lovely shells to add. Her thoughts were always positive when she worked on these. Her studio was full of pieces she had made over the last 3 years. She loved using glitter and sand and stones and shells and feathers. Her music was on a loop, a lovely satsang, and she hummed along, completely focused on what she was doing, thinking about her circles, her daughter, who had turned out so competent and positive. When she heard Steve coming down the garden path, making her little chime ring, she couldn't believe over an hour must have just gone by since he rang. She wiped her hands and opened the sliding French door into the garden. "Why, it's freezing. Come into the warmth. I have the fire going." She pulled him into the studio and he took her into his arms. "So lovely to look forward to you," he said. His face was all cold, but his lips were warm. "I had a good drive, and my visit with Ben and Faye was fantastic. She's pregnant." He looked at her, grinning happily. "Wow, and we only spoke about my brooding thoughts of a grandchild. You had no thoughts about it at all, you said." She smiled. "Well, obviously, you changed your tune." They both laughed and hugged. He took his jacket off and looked around. He did love this space, he thought. Such a brilliant area to work. He had left one of his guitars here. Silvana's drum and a wide variety of instruments were stored in the little storage area she had at the side, and the whole place smelled lovely and felt lovely. "So, tell me all about it. What is Faye like? When is the baby due, and how is your boy? Come on, sit down. Let's have a glass of wine and fill me in." He didn't have to be asked twice, and they settled on the comfy settee, which occupied the corner of the studio. Facing the fire, she snuggled into his arms, and he was only too pleased to tell her all about it. Chapter 65. Anna hears from her parents. Anna had been at the refuge for 3 weeks now, and in a few days' time they will celebrate Christmas here. She had been talking to Susan, who had urged her to get in touch with her parents in Russia. They must be desperate to have some news of her. All in all, she had been gone since August. Her parents will only celebrate since autumn. Her parents will only celebrate their Christmas at the end of December, but with her dad being English, she knew they would worry not to hear from her by the 25th of December. Despite her telling them that she was off to England in August already, that was when she had seen them last, it had been playing on her mind to let them know that she was okay. Oh, she did feel okay now. She had settled well into the refuge. She really liked Susan, Chris and Holly. They were lovely to her. But her best pal was Faye. They had become firm friends in such a short time. Anna could hardly believe it. She was not really very communicative, more of an introvert, and Faye was much livelier than her, particularly as she never imagined what a Chinese young woman of her age actually would be like. The ease with which they talked was great. Faye's family sounded nice. They seemed to live a simple life, and, in a way, so were her parents. She only really saw the value in this now. Her previous path of the bright lights had not really turned out anywhere near as exciting as she had imagined. She felt bad leaving her parents guessing how she was, and had written a short email last night. Thankfully, her dad had an email address. Her mum was not really interested and never used the computer at home. Her dad, on the other hand, loved it. He was 65, but had always been quite in touch with the wider world. Her mum loved their home and garden and their 2 dogs and 2 cats. She loved her neighbours, and her English was quite good, due to Dad, obviously. She was fairly up to date with the things she wanted to be up to date with, and sometimes picked up on her dad's newspapers. She was an avid reader, and thinking about it, her mum and her had shared many books over the earlier years. Anna had set up a new email address at the refuge. There was a general computer everybody could use, and Anna had pored for ages over the mail. She was all right now. She decided not to tell them about how she ended up in the refuge yet. She had told them that her original plan had not worked out, that she loved London and was staying at a newfound friend's house, which was somewhat true. She had started to work in the back garden, made herself also useful in the house. Isabella, with her 3 children, and Rosie, with her 3, had left the refuge. That had really reduced the numbers, and Susan was taking the opportunity to redecorate the rooms. Anna was quite handy with a paintbrush, and with Chris helping, they had almost transformed 4 rooms. She had really enjoyed the work and had lots of talks with Faye, who was now in Hamburg with Ben. They would be back on the 23rd of December, and they needed the next 3 days to get the house ready for Christmas Day. Holly and Chris were coming. Sophie and Dilly and their children were still at the house, and so was Sinead and her 3 children. There was a lot of preparations in the house, and it started to have a festive air. She was thinking of her parents and hoped that they had gotten her mail and responded. She gathered her things to check. That was chapter 65, and I finish here. Have a good day. Bye.